My name is Graham Smith, and I'm retired from the United States Navy with 22 years service. I first went into the Navy in 1944. I was still in high school and had to go in because I had a choice of either going into the Navy where I wanted to go or being drafted and going into the Army, which I didn't want. But anyway, I went through 2 or 3 different types of training and finally ended up aboard a ship, the USS Kinser, which was an APD. An APD is a high-speed transport. It was built on a destroyer hull, and we had room to carry about 90 troops aboard. It turned out when we finally got into the Pacific, we carried Marine reconnaissance troops. We were at the Battle of Okinawa, and around Okinawa there are lots of small islands, and our job was to go to these islands and offload the Marines, and they would paddle ashore in their rubber rafts and recon the island, then come back and make the report, and was sent into the fleet commander. One of the most memorable things that I can remember at Okinawa was that we were anchored in was later known as Buckner Bay, and ahead of us, about 200 or 300 yards, was the USS New Mexico, which was an older styled battleship, and all the armament, with the exception of their major guns, was all open. We were sitting there one evening, and our nemesis during that time were kamikazi planes, and this kamikazi plane came in and dove on the USS New Mexico and hit 4 gun mounts and killed everybody on all these gun mounts. It was such a horrible thing to see. We survived Okinawa. We were back in the United States being refitted to be part of the invasion of the home islands of Japan, and all of a sudden the war was over. We were so elated, but we had more work to do, so we went back out into the Pacific, ended up in Manila. And while in Manila, we got orders to go to Haiphong. In that time was known as French Indochina. Today it's Vietnam. When we arrived, we met 8 troop transports, and these troop transports were loading Chinese nationalist troops who had been fighting down in the south. Now this was in late October, 1st of November, and they were in their summer uniforms, and their uniforms were much like cheesecloth. They was very thin. In fact, they wore the old World War I type puttees around their legs or leggings. But we loaded them up, and while we were there, in fact, we hadn't been warned ahead of time that Haiphong was undergoing a cholera outbreak, and so we were not allowed to go ashore. We stayed anchored out in the bay and had to take all the shots too, which was very unpleasant. But we took these troops up to North China, way up across from Korea, a place called Qingwangtao, which we offloaded the troops, and then they began fighting the communists up there. I felt so sorry for these fellas that they were in these thin uniforms, and it was cold when we got up there on the 7th of November, and the wind which blew across the Gobi Desert was really biting. Now, on the trip up, one of the sad things that happened, every day at noon you would see one of the ships pull out of line. We were in single file, and some of the Chinese soldiers had succumbed to the cholera, and they would bury them at sea. And you'd see one ship after another pull out, and 2 or 3 body bags go over and were sunk. And that was such a horrible thing. But these were just some of my memories for the time that I spent in the Navy.